He was already gone when I realized I'd never really known him at all. But let me start at the beginning because that's where the warning came. Quiet, urgent. Slipped into my hand like a secret, too dangerous to speak out loud. My husband and I had been married for 11 days. We flew back from Sedona on a Sunday. The trip had been beautiful in the way that expensive things sometimes are, polished and perfect and somehow hollow underneath. I told myself the hollowness was just post-wedding exhaustion. I told myself that a lot of things were just exhaustion. His name was Marcus. Marcus Hale. He was 38, a corporate real estate attorney with an apartment in River North, and a smile that made you feel like the only person in a very crowded room. I was 29, a pediatric occupational therapist at Northwestern Memorial. We met at a charity gala. My friend Priya dragged me to 18 months before the wedding. He found me by the dessert table pretending to read a silent auction description for a golf vacation I had zero interest in. He said, "You look like someone who was just told they have to stay 2 more hours." I laughed. I shouldn't have, but I did. We dated for 9 months, engaged for 6. Married on a Saturday in October with white dahlias and my mother crying in the front row and my father, who passed when I was 7, represented only by a framed photo I asked them to place near the altar. My aunt said he would have loved Marcus. I held on to that. The night we came back from the honeymoon, Marcus suggested dinner, not cooking at home, not takeout, dinner, at a restaurant called Alara in the West Loop that had a 3-week wait list. He had a reservation. He always had a reservation. That was the thing about Marcus. Everything was already arranged before you thought to ask. I wore a dark green dress and my hair down, and I remember thinking, sitting across from him in that candlelit booth, that this was supposed to be the happiest chapter of my life. I kept waiting to feel it. We ordered. Marcus excused himself to take a call outside. He was always taking calls outside. He said it was a consideration thing, didn't want to bother other diners. I thought that was thoughtful. I thought a lot of things about Marcus were thoughtful. I was looking at the menu, not really reading it, when I felt someone beside me. An older woman had stopped at my table. She looked to be in her late 60s, silver-haired, wearing a pale blue cardigan over a floral blouse. She looked like someone's grandmother. She looked completely harmless, but her eyes, when they met mine, were sharp and deliberate in a way that made me sit up straighter. She reached out and pressed something into my palm. Folded bills. Before I could react, she leaned down close to my ear and she whispered 4 words. "Don't go home tonight." Then she straightened up, looked once toward the restaurant entrance where Marcus had gone, and walked away. I sat there with a fistful of cash and a heartbeat I could feel in my throat. I looked down, $400 in 50s. I looked up. The woman was gone, not at another table, not heading toward the restroom. Gone. I almost called after her. I almost flagged the server. I almost did a lot of things. Instead, I sat very still and tried to understand what had just happened, and Marcus came back through the door and sat down across from me and said, "Sorry about that. You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said. I think the flight caught up with me. He smiled and poured me more water, and I watched his hands and thought, "Don't go home tonight." I went home. Of course I went home. I told myself the woman was confused or unwell or had mistaken me for someone else. I tucked the $400 into the inner pocket of my coat and I told myself it was nothing. That was 11 days ago. I am telling you this now from a room in a Marriott off I-90 with the deadbolt turned and my phone charging on the nightstand and a manila envelope on the bed beside me that contains enough evidence to put my husband away for the rest of his life. Let me tell you how I got here. 3 weeks into marriage, I started noticing the small things, not red flags exactly, more like the negative space in a photograph, the outline of something that shouldn't be there. Marcus worked long hours, which I'd always known, but the calls outside had increased. He'd started angling his laptop screen away when I walked by. He kept a second phone. He said it was for work, a dedicated line for one particularly demanding client, in the breast pocket of his suit jacket, and twice I saw him delete a message thread before setting it down on the kitchen counter. I didn't snoop. I want to be clear about that. I am not that person. or at least I didn't used to be. What I did was notice, the way you notice when a room smells different, when the furniture has shifted 2 inches, when someone laughs a half second too late. A month after our wedding, I had a late shift canceled at the hospital and came home at 3 in the afternoon to an empty apartment. Marcus wasn't due back until 7. I made tea and sat on the couch and opened my laptop to finish some patient documentation, and that's when I saw it. His email was open on the shared desktop. He used it for grocery lists, for printing boarding passes. He'd forgotten to log out. I should have closed the tab, I know that. Instead, I looked, because somewhere between "don't go home tonight" and those angled laptop screens, my gut had started sending signals my brain kept refusing to receive. The email at the top was from someone named V. Castellano, time-stamped 2 days ago. The subject line was blank. The preview text in the inbox read, "She doesn't know yet. Keep it that way. The paperwork from Renata's estate it cut off there." I clicked. I read. I won't tell you everything in that email right now because some of it I didn't understand until later, but what I understood immediately was this. There was a woman named Renata. She had an estate. Something had been transferred, and my husband was involved in keeping whatever this was hidden from me. I logged out of his email. I closed the laptop. I sat with my tea until it was cold, and I thought about a woman in a pale blue cardigan pressing money into my hand, and I thought, she knew something. I started being careful after that. I started noticing exits. The following Saturday, Marcus had a morning golf round with a client. He left at 6:30. I waited until 7, and then I did something I am not proud of, and I am not ashamed of, and I would do again in a heartbeat. I went into his home office. Marcus kept his office locked. He'd said it was for client confidentiality, sensitive documents, privileged communications. I'd never questioned it. I didn't have a key. What I had was a memory of watching him retrieve his spare from a ceramic bowl on the bookshelf 6 weeks before our wedding, when a locksmith came to rekey the front door. The bowl was still there. So was the key. His office was meticulous. Banker's boxes lined one wall, each labeled with client names I didn't recognize. His desk had a single framed photo of the two of us at a winery in Napa, taken on a trip we took the previous spring. I looked at my face in that photo and I tried to remember what I'd been thinking that afternoon, and I couldn't. I didn't touch the boxes. I didn't open drawers. What I was looking for was the second phone, which he always kept on him, but might have left behind this morning in his rush. And I was right. It was in the top right drawer of his desk, plugged into a small charging cable, the screen dark. I picked it up. It was locked. I set it down. But underneath the phone, partially tucked beneath the charging cable, was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was a handwritten list. Names, 7 of them, each with a date beside them. Some names I didn't recognize. 2 I did. The second name on the list was Renata Voss. The 7th name was mine, Elena Marsh Hale, with a date that was 3 months from now. My hands didn't shake. That's what I remember most clearly. My hands were very still and my vision got extremely precise, and I folded the paper exactly as I'd found it and placed it back beneath the charging cable, and I walked out of the office and I locked the door behind me, and I went to the kitchen and I stood at the sink and I ran cold water over my wrists for a long time. I thought about calling the police. I picked up my phone twice. Both times I stalked, because what did I have? A list with my name on it, a date, 6 other names. My husband was a real estate attorney. He could explain a list like that in 30 different ways before I finished my sentence. I had a feeling that what I needed was more than a feeling. I needed to find out who those other names were. I started searching that afternoon. 3 of the 7 names I found on public records databases that patients' families had showed me how to use years ago when navigating disability claims. I cross-referenced with obituaries. Renata Voss died 14 months ago, ruled accidental drowning at her lake house in Wisconsin. She had been 33. She was a marketing director. She was unmarried at the time of her death, but according to a brief tribute in a local paper, she had recently ended a serious relationship. No name given for the former partner. The 5th name, Diane Okafor, died 22 months ago. Cause of death listed as a single-car accident on a rural highway outside Galena. She was 31. The 3rd name, Sasha Brenner, died 3 years ago, ruled a suicide. She was 28. I sat with those 3 windows open on my screen, and I felt the floor shift underneath me in a way that had nothing to do with movement. I wasn't the 7th victim, I was the 7th target. His pattern was real relationships. I understood that now. Not random, intimate, trusted. He built something real enough with each of them that when they died, no one looked at him twice. A grieving ex-partner, a horrified former boyfriend. The police saw accidents, they saw a tragedy. They did not see a pattern because the women were in different counties, different states, and there was no one connecting the dots, no one except the woman in the pale blue cardigan. I did not sleep that night. Marcus came home at 2 in the afternoon from golf, kissed my cheek, said the client was happy, and did I want to get Thai food delivered? I said yes. I sat across from him at our kitchen island and watched him use chopsticks and laugh at something on his phone, and I thought, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 4 years. I needed time, and I needed to think clearly, and I needed to find the woman in the pale blue cardigan. I didn't know her name. I didn't know how she knew Marcus or what she knew. What I had was the restaurant, the night, and a physical description. I called Alara and asked to speak with the manager. I explained that an older woman had left something with me the night of my reservation and I was trying to return it. The manager was sympathetic but unhelpful. They had no way to identify a guest who hadn't made the reservation herself. I was about to hang up when the host added, "She might be a regular actually. Silver hair, blue cardigan. She comes in sometimes on Tuesday evenings, sits at the bar. She's very kind. I think her name is Ruth." I went back on Tuesday evening. I sat at the bar and I ordered a glass of wine I didn't drink, and at 6:45 Ruth walked in. She saw me immediately. Something moved across her face. Relief, I think, and also grief. And she sat down beside me and she said very quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Tell me everything," I said. Ruth Voss had been Renata's mother. She had spent 14 months trying to prove that her daughter's drowning was not an accident. She'd hired a private investigator who confirmed that Renata had been in a relationship with a Marcus Hale for 7 months before her death. She had found, through her investigator, that 2 other women connected to Marcus had also died. She had brought this to the police twice. Both times they had logged her report and done nothing. A grieving mother, one detective told her, not unkindly, sometimes looks for someone to blame. She had been watching Marcus for 6 months. She'd been at that restaurant because she'd followed him. When she saw me young, the right age, the right look, she said she knew. She said she could see it in how he arranged things, the expensive restaurant, the particular way he positioned himself across for me, the phone call outside. He did the same things with Renata, she told me. In the same order, same kind of place, same kind of call. The $400, she said, was all she had in her wallet. She wanted me to have a head start if I needed one. I took her hand across the bar and I said, "Help me get him." Ruth's private investigator, a former Chicago PD detective named Carl Brewer, had spent months building a file. He had phone records showing communication between Marcus and a woman named Vivian Castellano, who appeared in public records as a licensed notary and estate attorney. He had financial records showing that within 12 months of each woman's death, assets had been transferred, quietly, legally, through trusts and estates, to holding companies that traced back, through 3 layers of shell entities, to Marcus Hale. He had done this 6 times. The legal mechanism, Carl explained, was a power of attorney obtained during the relationship, usually framed as responsible planning, something that would only matter in an emergency. Each woman had signed one. I thought about Marcus sliding paperwork across the kitchen table 2 weeks before our wedding. "Just estate planning, Elena. Everyone should have this in order." I had signed without reading carefully because I trusted him, because he was a lawyer and I was a pediatric OT, and because he had that smile that made you feel like the only person in the room. I had signed a power of attorney giving Marcus control over my accounts and assets in the event that I was incapacitated. Carl had one gap in his evidence. He had a clear financial picture of what Marcus had done after each woman died, but nothing that directly proved causation. The deaths had each been ruled accidental or self-inflicted. He needed something that connected Marcus to the deaths themselves, not just the financial aftermath. That something was in the office I'd already been inside. I told Carl about the list. I told him about the second phone. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "If there's documentation of prior planning in that office, it would change everything. But Elena, you cannot take anything. You cannot photograph it on your own. The moment you take evidence from a marital home, his defense will argue spoliation, will argue you fabricated it, will argue the chain of custody is broken. We need law enforcement to find it. The police won't act without something first," I said. "No," he said, "but the FBI might. Here is what happened next, and I need you to understand that this part required a kind of cold patience. I didn't know I had until I needed it." Carl had a contact at the FBI field office, an agent named Torres who worked white-collar crimes and had, as it happened, a flag on Vivienne Castellano's name from a separate investigation 2 years prior that had gone nowhere. Carl reached out. Agent Torres agreed to a meeting. I sat across from her in a conference room, and I told her everything, in order, without crying, and she listened the way people listen when they are recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a case they'd filed away. I gave her Carl's financial documentation. I gave her the name Renata Voss and Diane Okafor and Sasha Brenner. I gave her the name of the restaurant and the date of the dinner and the 4 words a woman had whispered to me in the candlelight. Agent Torres looked at me and said, "Mrs. Hale, I need to ask you something important. Can you get back into that office?" I said I could. She told me exactly what she needed and exactly how I needed to get it. She said, "We are not asking you to take anything. We are asking you to confirm its existence. One photograph of the list, taken on your personal phone, documented with a timestamp. In the presence of a witness you will call immediately after. That photograph will be used not as evidence in itself, but as the basis for a warrant. The warrant will produce the evidence legally. If there's more in there than just the list," she said, "and I think there might be, we need the warrant to find it clean." I went home that Tuesday night and I was a wife. I made dinner. I watched television. I went to bed beside my husband and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about a woman named Sasha Brenner who was 28 years old, and I did not close my eyes for a very long time. On Thursday, Marcus had an early client breakfast downtown. He left at 7. I went into the office at 7:15. I called Carl the moment I crossed the threshold and kept him on the line. The list was still in the drawer. I photographed it. I photographed the drawer it was in, the desk it was part of, the room around me for context. Carl confirmed the timestamps. I was out in 11 minutes. What I did not expect was what else I found while I was photographing the list's location. In the back of the same drawer, behind the phone, was a second folded document, a printed email chain. The top message was from Vivienne Castellano, dated 9 weeks ago, 2 weeks before our wedding. The subject line was, "Elena M. Timeline." The email chain laid out in the language of scheduling and logistics the timeline of my death. Not those words. The words were careful, neutral, financial, transfer of assets, finalization of estate, estimated window. But the meaning was clear to anyone who knew what to look for, and Agent Torres, when I forwarded Carl's summary, knew exactly what she was looking at. The FBI executed a search warrant on our apartment, on Marcus's office specifically, 48 hours later. While I was at work and Marcus was in a deposition downtown, they found the physical document. They found 2 external hard drives in a locked drawer the warrant covered. They found on those drives records that Carl Brewer had been trying to reconstruct for 14 months, financial trails, communication with Castellano, and a set of photographs from a location I won't describe that constituted, per Agent Torres, the most significant direct evidence in the case. They also found documentation connecting Marcus to the death of Diane Okafor that would allow the Galena case to be reopened. Marcus Hale was arrested on a Thursday afternoon as he exited the building where he'd been in that deposition. Vivienne Castellano was arrested simultaneously at her office on the north side. I was not there for either arrest. I was sitting in Carl Brewer's office drinking bad coffee and watching Agent Torres text updates to Carl in real time. When the message came through that said simply "both in custody," I put down the coffee cup and I put my face in my hands and I breathed. The FBI held a briefing for families of the identified victims the following week. Ruth Voss sat beside me. She held my hand through most of it, and when it was over, she pulled me into a hug in the hallway, and neither of us said anything for a while because there wasn't anything adequate to say. Her daughter had been gone for 14 months. The knowing didn't bring her back, but Ruth had done what she came to do, and so had I, and that was something neither of us would have to carry alone anymore. I filed for emergency divorce proceedings the following Monday. My attorney, a woman I found myself this time, and whose documents I read 3 times before signing, told me that given the circumstances, the process would move quickly. The power of attorney I'd signed was voided by court order within the week. I am not going to pretend that I am fine. I am not fine in the way that anyone would be fine after discovering that the person they slept beside, the person they said vows to in front of everyone they loved, had already written them a death date and tucked it in a drawer. I have a therapist now. I have Priya, who has shown up at my apartment with wine and takeout more times than I can count, and who never once says I told you something was off, even though she absolutely told me something was off. And I have this. I listened. Eventually, I listened. A woman in a pale blue cardigan pressed $400 into my hand and told me not to go home, and I went home anyway. But then I started paying attention, and I kept paying attention, and that is why I am here. If someone who has no reason to help you takes a risk to warn you, pay attention. If something in your own body is sending signals your brain keeps talking you out of, pay attention. If the story doesn't add up, if the room smells different, if the furniture has shifted 2 inches, pay attention. That's all I have. That's everything. My name is Elena, and I got out, and I'm still here.